Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just give it another couple of minutes to let anybody trying to log in arrive, and then we'll get going. Okay, then. Well, hopefully everybody that is planning on joining us has arrived. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I am Barry John Graham, and I'm one of NQA's ISMS and PIMS regional assessors. I can see some names in there that have met previously during the course of the past year, and I hope you are well under these strange times we live in. And to those I've yet to meet or are lined up to meet soon, an equal welcome to you too, and all others I will never encounter otherwise. Everybody's welcome. I hope that you're finding this and all of the other content we have available for you useful during these times of constraint. Today, I'm going to be examining the new 27701 Privacy Information Management System, often called PIMS, P-I-M-S. In 2018, both the Data Protection Act in the UK and GDPR across the European Union, terms which, if you're not familiar, I'll explain as we progress. Both of those things were implemented, and they directly affected industry across all sectors, not just in the UK, but all over the world. And this is affected where the collection or processing of private data is undertaken. The relative speed at which the legislation was established left a lot of organisations unable to adequately respond to meet the needs of the legislation in full, and therefore a number of well-publicised breaches have occurred as a result of failing to adhere to this legislation. The development of 27701 will hopefully address some of the concern that some organisations have in terms of making sure that they do not subject themselves to similar breach. As you've already received an email from the marketing team, I'm sure you've already seen what is contained within the brief, but as a quick refresher, we'll be looking at a very brief legislation overview of GDPR and Data Protection Act in particular, why PIMS and 27701 have been developed, what this standard and compliance to it will mean for your business and your organisations, the benefits, and how to do an implementation having a baseline of 27001 in place already. Additionally, in addition to this webinar, you can download for free previous versions of the webinar and any blogs which are lined up to the topic in particular. It's well worth exploring the NQA website if you haven't done so already. There's a lot of free information on there which will help you if you're thinking about both implementing a ISMS or a privacy information management system on the back of that. I am happy to answer any questions as we go along. If they're going to be covered in a slide which is coming up, I'll probably leave it till the end and then review whether that question's needed. Please just type those into the box so I can see them. There is time once we've finished the presentation to pick up any questions which haven't been answered directly within the webinar, or if you feel like you need to jump away and want to ask me a question offline, then I'll have my contact details on the last slide, so you can message me direct with any questions or inquiries you wish to raise. Finally, before we get going, I'll remind you that you will all receive a full copy of this recording along with the slide deck once the webinar has completed. As this standard and the legislation it addresses is such a large and important topic, I'll restrict information within the webinar to an overview of sorts, and this includes GDPR and DPA 18. I can't go into full detail about what each requirement of GDPR is, for example, or what DPA differences are to GDPR, but I will give you an overview of some of the more pertinent points. Well, now that we've got the introductions out of the way, let's carry on. As it says there, we have a large global client base. We continue to serve remotely in these difficult times, and we have been serving these for over 30 years. So you rest assured that you are in good hands. We work with a variety of clients, from single management systems to complex multi-site organizations with varying standards in place. We are able to tailor the approach to support individual clients' needs and make a unique price promise to our customers, which is highlighted on screen. So as we've briefly mentioned there already, here is an outline of what we'll be covering during this webinar. I'm talking to you today from the UK in the Midlands, and for now at least, with the EU, though the Brexit thing is yet to play out. So I'll focus on the legislation which is pertinent to both the EU and the UK. However, there have been other data privacy developments globally, and I can't cover them all in this presentation, but if you have information which is specific to a country you are either working in or working alongside, then I can point you in the right direction if you ask the question. Armed with the understanding of the legislative scenery, we will move on to the development of 27701 and why it has been rolled out. And then we will look at what benefits there are to compliance and how to implement this standard within your existing ISMS. So the terminology in use by 27701, which you might not overly be familiar with, will start there. When examining the standard and the language used within legislation, there are some notable differences with what you may be used to, for example, if you have an ISMS or quality management system. Some of the more pertinent and applicable examples are on screen, and these are some things which will come up time and again, both in this webinar, and if you've got a copy of the standard as you go through it, these are some of the things you'll encounter. So PII, personally identifiable information. The PIMS we've covered. The roles of controllers and processors are different when it comes to handling the personal data, so distinctions need to be made. The ICO, which in the UK is the Information Commissioner's Office, each country has its own equivalent of an ICO. And pseudonymization, which at the bottom there, and this is a technique which replaces or removes information in a data set that identifies an individual. And this may involve replacing names or other identifiers with PIN numbers or unique serial numbers, for example, something which is an organization is able to use, but doesn't trace directly back to the owner of the personal information. So I felt it best to establish this slide first, as some of the language will be used is common throughout the rest of the presentation. So PIMS are systems that help give individuals more control over personal data. Okay, it allows individuals to manage whatever PII they have in a secure local or online hard copy environment, and to have the choice over where it is shared, and PIMS guide you through this. The basis of a functional privacy information system is balance between protection and privacy. There are differences there. Data protection means keeping the data safe from access unauthorized or otherwise breached. And privacy means empowering individuals who own that data to make their own decisions about who can process the data and for what purpose it is processed. But what is personal data? Personal data is information that relates to an identified or identifiable individual. So some examples of that are seen on the right-hand side of the slide. That is not an exhaustive list. Those are the most common things which constitute personal data. Even if an individual is identified or identifiable directly or indirectly from data which is being processed, it is not personal data unless it relates to the individual. When considering whether information relates to an individual, an account of a number of factors needs to be taken, which includes content of the information, the purpose for which it is being processed, and the likely impact or effect that the processing has on the individual. It's possible that the same information is personal data for one controller's purposes, but is not personal data for the purposes of another controller. So one data set doesn't mean the same from controller to controller. Information which has had identifiers removed or replaced in order to pseudonymize the data is still personal data in the eyes of GDPR. So we've established now what a privacy information system is and what constitutes personal data. Let's have a look at some of the legislation which protects the latter. Legislative considerations for most organisations operating in the UK at present will include both DPA 18 and GDPR. This slide was written before the 31st of January, so the Brexit and what that means now is still a grey area. Okay, and the following slide will address that. But ultimately, if you're in the UK right now, you are still bound by some of the legislation set out in GDPR, in addition to Data Protection Act 18. And like I said at the introduction there, this isn't a legal compliance brief. This is a compliance to a standards overview. So further information about specifics within legislation can be sought elsewhere. And if you need a hand looking for that, then please do let me know. So under Section 3 of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018, the GDPR will be incorporated directly into domestic law immediately after the UK exits the European Union. Now, that was the plan, at least before everything we now live in has occurred. So the plan was to live as though we were still a part of the EU for the time being, and then work out what things look like as this year progresses. Whether or not that now occurs, I don't know. So in terms of the effect on EU legislation, the no-deal Brexit would release a complex and costly outcome for business, which are relying on cross-border data transfers within the EU. Outside of the EU, the UK will be or seek to be given third country status. Countries which live in this category will need to show that their data protection laws are robust enough if they are to secure an adequacy agreement. So GDPR coverage continues in summary there. An adequacy decision permits cross-border data transfer outside of the EU or onward transfer from one party outside of the EU without further authorization from a national supervisory authority such as ITO. The UK government did make it clear and continues to make it clear when it talks this way that it will seek this adequacy agreement with the EU. However, the process for this only kick-started once the UK decided to leave the EU. And this period we are living in now is still a period of uncertainty about how things will look in terms of meshing GDPR requirements into national legislation. Okay, this is unclear. But for now, we're going to continue as though GDPR is still going to apply, and the UK has been given third country status, which is the most likely outcome. So that's some of the legislation against which this standard has been generated. As mentioned, the focus is on GDPR and DPA 18. I've specifically not covered things in the United States or India, China, some South American countries. All of these places do have a mishmash of legislative considerations which are in effect, and they should be considered and thoroughly researched if you operate in or are trading in or do business in these areas. So what we'll do now is look at the development of the standard and some of the benefits of implementation of the standard to enhance your ISMS, along with a brief examination of some of the pitfalls of data breach. So ISO 27001 formally specifies an information security management system, which is a suite of activities concerning the management of information risks. The ISMS is an overarching management framework through which the organisation identifies, analyses and addresses information risks. The ISMS ensures that the security arrangements are fine-tuned to keep pace with with changes to the security threats, vulnerabilities, and business impacts. This is an important aspect in such a dynamic field and the key advantage of ISO 27001 flexible risk-driven approach. The new standard, 27701, is designed to be an enhancement or bolt-on, if you would, to an existing ISMS, although I have been and recently conducted an audit for an organisation which started with nothing and then implemented both the ISMS and privacy system at the same time, so it can be done. However, most of the rest of this presentation assumes that you either have or understand fully a functional ISMS. So yes, we will talk about 27701 as an enhancement to an existing 27001. So regardless of the maturity of an existing ISMS, which is aligned to 27001, there is no guarantee at present that data protection needs are adequately considered, especially since the introduction of legislation with specific requirements such as GDPR and DPA 18. Existing certificates for 27001 ensure that organizations demonstrate that information security is in place within an organization. However, data protection requires that organization go a step further, and hopefully this implementation guide will ease any fears about how big of a step that is. Let's take information protection, for example. At present, any organisation with an ISMS is protected information it has obtained through routine activity. Data privacy requires that this is taken a step further and the rights of the data subjects are considered. And clearly, 27001 alone does not allow for this. Even within the A18 area, there is a compliance to legislation area, but it doesn't specify what that means or how you do it, whereas the PIMS does. So why do we develop a PIMS? ISO are recognized internationally as authorities on management systems and best practice. ISO publications do carry a great deal of weight, and certification to their management system standards through recognized schemes are an extremely effective way of meeting compliance demands and proving your compliance to customers, business partners, and regulators. While there are already some publications and standards that discuss data protection, many are not international or recognized widely. They primarily focus on data protection requirements and good practice in specific jurisdictions. British Standard 100.1.2 draws solely from the GDPR and UK's Data Protection Act 18 to give one such example, whereas ISO, once implemented, will give you a broader scope. Crucially, this means that 27701 supports compliance with a wider international range of data protection and privacy legislation to give peace of mind to organisations with pan-regional business concerns. 27701 defines the extra requirements for an ISMS to cover privacy and the processing of PII. These are supported by additional controls that relate specifically to data protection and privacy. As a new whole, this creates what the standard calls a privacy information management system. So, as previously indicated, there's been no guidance on how to effectively implement processes within an existing structure which adheres to GDPR or DPA 18, for example. 27701 PIMS is that extension to a well-established ISMS. 27701 details the requirements and gives the required guidance for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and improvements of a PIMS. The standard is based on the requirements, control objectives, and controls of the ISMS standard, and includes a suite of privacy requirements, controls, and control objectives. Concepts of information security are familiar to organizations which have operational ISMS already. The new standard will ensure that organizations have a comprehensive data governance process which directly map to legislative requirements. So why do it? Instances of GDPR breach have been well publicized and have affected organizations globally, even continuing to do so, even where the primary base of operations has not been in the EU or the UK. A recent report by Capgemini, and I've got this available if you'd like it, outlines that up to 70% of all organizations believe that they are not currently compliant to GDPR requirements. The severity of the penalties which organizations attract through non-compliance with GDPR has necessitated the creation of this standard. Since 27701 is a type of PIMS, its purpose is mainly related to data privacy and security. It specifically holds the framework and requirements for privacy controls and practices. 27701 serves as an extension to an ISMS, so the latter is required for companies looking to implement PIMS. So you can't just implement the privacy management system. You need the ISMS functional first, and then to bolt on the privacy information on the top of it. The primary goals of 27701 are to strengthen the existing ISMS with the extension of PIMS, as well as privacy-related controls, simplify the management of complicated overlapping privacy law, create a privacy program that's grounded in evidence and shows GDPR compliance through a recognized form of certification, and perform as the foundation for potential GDPR compliance. The information shown on screen acts as the stick, and this is the implications of data privacy breach, which can be shown there as being quite severe. A quick Google search on privacy breach and fines will give you all of the examples you need. There's plenty of them out there, and there's more every day. I've not specified organisations deliberately who've felt the full power of the legislation, but it is very easy to search, which is why I'll leave it to the individual. When we think of search engines, for our most minds, we think of Google. And yes, Google themselves have fallen foul of GDPR through the lack of consent on advertising. And this was brought to a court in France and set them back almost 50 million euros. The benefits of the implementation of ISMS are well documented and covered elsewhere in both webinars and free marketing material available through the NQA website. Here, I've outlined some of the wider implications for an organisation for the implementation of the Privacy Information Management System technical extension. So the benefits of the ISMS and PIMS compliance is adherence to legislation, and therefore by having this you are going to comply with the requirements of GDPR, and the likelihood of data breach is reduced considerably. Information security risks and issues which are identified in the ISMS and the PIMS provides the means by which an organisation can communicate and consult upon its information security risks. The output of these may significantly reduce compliance workloads by negating the need to support multiple certifications, increase the trust between organisations and their customers by demonstrating compliance with data privacy laws, which is increasingly important. It generates evidence that data protection officers can provide to senior management and board members to show progress in privacy regulatory compliance. Increase the opportunities for business and commerce through cross-border data flows. Training needs are identified and realised for information security, and the adequacy of subsequent training assessed through the measures of competency. Cost reduction. By implementing the ISMS and the PIMS, significant financial savings can be realised, not forgetting the effect that incident reduction can have upon the morale of employees, clients and other stakeholders. Simply put, it is a reputation boon. And liability is minimised. As information security incidents and their associated risks are eliminated or controlled, liabilities are reduced, offering greater stability to the business. So there's a whole suite of positives to come from implementation. Now, most of us will be familiar with the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. An example is on the screen here for 27001. This incorporates the clauses commonly associated with management systems. 27701 provides an additional layer to this at each stage of the cycle. This is shown on the screen now. The features shown will be brought to life during the next part of this presentation. For example, where and when does PIMS require additional considerations? Don't worry if you missed any of this. Like I said, you get the slide deck at the end with all of these slides in it. So to fully implement the Privacy Information Management System, an organisation must first have an ISMS as a foundation to attach the requirements of the technical extension. 3 areas of this technical extension must be addressed, and as displayed on the screen there. Clause 5 and 6 of 27701 give direct extensions and requirements for enhancing ISMS clauses and controls respectively, and these are covered in detail in the slides which follow. Annex A and Annex B of 27701 throw up additional new requirements which we have not encountered within the ISMS and are specific to the Privacy Information Management System for controls for PII controllers and processors respectively. As they are controls aligned to the standard, this requires an organisation to produce a statement of applicability in a similar vein to that created for the ISMS. All organisations with 27001 will currently have a statement of applicability with 114 controls listed and then an indication of whether they've been implemented in their system or not. Similarly, for Privacy Information Management System, a statement of applicability for both PII controllers and PII processors should be raised with each control listed in a similar fashion. So the first bit of work to do is generate a couple of extra statement of applicability pieces, not quite as extensive as 27001, but necessary all the same. The construct of these is covered at the end of this presentation. However, conceptually, the requirement is the same. Each control must be included in either the PII controller or PII processor statement of applicability, along with justification of whether it's included or excluded. However, for now, we'll move on to Clause 5 and the requirements in the new standard for existing ISMS clause extensions. This table shows the ISMS clauses. Hopefully everybody should be familiar with and well established, and how they are mapped across to the new Privacy Information Management System subclauses. Where there are no privacy information specific requirements, there should be an extension to existing terms, and these are shown on the next slide, direct giveaway. You can see here that the functional ISMS will require only an additional piece of work in the context and planning areas to address the needs of PIMS, and these will follow as well. I'm aware because the clause numbers do not directly correspond between the standards, there may be some initial confusion as you get into bed with this and begin to understand what this means. Don't worry too much about subclause numbering, but please keep this table handy when you're reviewing in the future, because it will make things map across very easy if you've got this as you've opened in both standards. So let's examine clause 5.2 from ISO 27001. Existing terms have been amended to include privacy, and those are highlighted on the slide. Similarly, other 27001 clauses with no PIMS specific requirements should be subject to the same considerations. And next, we will look at the specific additional requirements of the PIMS, which are not already included within the clause areas you have within your ISMS already, and which cannot be remedied by a simple extension to term as seen on this slide. So clause 4 of 27001 is context of the organisation. Note that as we pre-warned, the clause for 27001 differs slightly, so it says 5.2.1, excuse me. So the organisations must now determine the role of PII controller and or PII processor within the organisational context, and where do these entities sit. Include any interested parties associated with the management system which process PII data, include PII processing in the scope of the ISMS, and finally, for this section, a slight extension to the ISMS in terms of inclusion of PIMS. A further example is shown on the screen there. Similarly, planning clause for 27001 is 6, though the corresponding clause for 27701 is 5.4. Again, refers back to the table you've just seen in the future. Hopefully you can see there is a little bit of work to do in terms of making sure additional requirements are raised in the new standard, but mostly it's just an extension of existing policy wording to make sure it's covered for data privacy. So then, clause 6 of 27701 provides guidance on additional requirements for existing Annex A controls from 27001. All organisations with an ISMS will have a statement of applicability, as we've said, and this includes whether they are included or excluded from the ISMS. The PIMS requires an extension to some of these controls with specifications about how it relates to data privacy. And the outline for these are contained in clause 6 of 27701. However, the next few slides will provide some guidance on what it actually looks like and where existing controls require an enhancement. I've tried to summarize it all and bring out the more pertinent points. However, please refer to both the standard and this presentation in the aftermath to review as you are looking at your own system. Simply put, I don't have time to cover absolutely every extension which is required, or specify how that should look for you and your ISMS already. However, this webinar and the slide deck will give you an idea about where additional work is required. It may seem like a lot, but in reality, it's really not a lot of work if you've already got a functional ISMS. So I'll just pick one from each page as we go through so you can see. So we'll pick on 921 there, so user registration and deregistration. And the organisation should not reissue to users any deactivated or expired user IDs for systems and services that process personally identifiable information. In the case where the organisation is providing PII processing as a service, the customer can be responsible for some or all aspects of user ID management. Such cases should be included in the documented information. In some circumstances, the frequency of checks for unused authentication credentials on a system which process PII are a specified requirement, for example, biannually or monthly. It can vary. When you're generating your policies, you should ensure that you've given full consideration to jurisdictions you are working under. As I say, it's not just DPA and GDPR. Wherever you work, there will be data privacy jurisdictions. It's important to understand where you're working under and specific rules applicable to you. So even, as we see on there, clear desk and clear screen, a very well established policy within the ISMS, and there's a slight extension requirement for the PIMS in terms of the organisation should restrict the creation of hard copy material, including PII, only to the minimum needed to fulfill the identified processing purpose. And this should be just a slight tweak to ISMS policies to reflect hard copy PII requirements. So while it may seem, again, like there's just extra work in PIMS, it's actually just ensuring that not a lot of hard copy information is produced that you do not need for whichever role you're fulfilling. Simple. So 14.1.2, securing application services. Sometimes sending an email over the internet is inescapable. It has to be done. And on occasions such as this, the standard requires that personally identifiable information is subject to encryption. Some facets of what is considered in PII must be exposed, such as email address or even name in some circumstances. But where applicable, controls to maintain the confidentiality of other PII should be taken. So a fairly simple one there. So responsibilities and procedures. Existing incident management policies should be enhanced to include data privacy incidents. And this includes identification of a suitable party to notify people and authorities when PII breach has been identified. If you're in the UK, the ICO provides guidance on response requirements for UK businesses, and this includes mandatory response and notification periods. So again, if you've got an ISMS and an incident management procedure, it's an extra clause within the policy to state where responsibilities lie, and perhaps a table to indicate what mandatory response periods are for the jurisdiction you work in. So yeah, we skirted very quickly through those tables there deliberately. Otherwise, it's very dry listening to me bring out every single piece of work which is required to extend existing ISMS controls. Okay, like I said, the table's there for you. When you get the presentation and the slide deck, it'd be very good to start with the table which explains the clause area mapping across to the new standard, and then work your way through, open your statement of applicability for your ISMS, and then work your way through the slide deck provided to see where an extension is required. You'll notice I've not listed 114 controls in this PowerPoint presentation, and then there aren't 114 extensions required. I've only done where there is additional work required, and any gaps you see in the presentation versus your SOA are where no additional considerations are needed. So the slide you can see on your screen there, although you may have heard the definitions and the names mentioned, for reasons of brevity, I've not gone into full detail, either in this webinar or in the previous slides. over the roles of PII controllers and processes within an organisation. So here is a very, very quick overview of the role of each. As we've previously examined, an organisation must determine whether they are the controller of PII or the processor of a PII on behalf of a controller, and ensure that the implementation which follows addresses the requirements for the role you have selected. So each of the controllers and the processors track the requirement to generate a statement of applicability. A review of each table within 27701 at both Annex A and Annex B respectively will provide you with the required headings for controllers and processors. We're looking at controllers specifically now. The process to those who have an ISMS will be familiar in terms of providing justifications about where activity takes place or not, and the inclusion of a control within the system or not, and justification either way. On the screen is a breakout of the standard. In essence, this statement of applicability for PII controllers contain 31 entries with inclusions and exclusions justified, and those 31 entries correspond to the 31 listed controls within Annex A of the new standard. PII processors similarly should have their own SOA or delineated control considerations within an existing statement of applicability. On screen is a breakout of the standard. It says PII controllers in the heading there. It should be processors. My apologies. So within this statement of applicability, if you act as a PII processor on behalf of a PII controller, you should have a statement of applicability which could contain 18 entries with inclusions and exclusions justified. What we'll do in the next edition of this webinar is show you an example of a statement of applicability for both controllers and processors, so you can see the differences between each, because you can't have, for example, processors information in an SOA for a controller and vice versa. There should be two separate, if you are a controller and a processor, you should have two separate statements of applicability to enhance your existing ISMS Annex A statement of applicability with both 31 and then 18 entries, and those correspond to the controls listed in the new standard. So that's it for this presentation. We've examined the standard, its origins, some of the benefits and requirements, and followed this journey through from an initial idea about why this standard was created through to how to implement it with your existing ISMS in place. As promised at the beginning, this is an opportunity to note down my direct email address, as well as email address for NQA for more general inquiries. I'll answer any questions which are on this, the dashboard today now, but if there are questions which are not answered directly within the presentation or the slide deck upon review, whether it's a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, it doesn't matter. If you've got a question about implementing PIM, privacy information against your current information security management system, I'll be more than happy to answer those. Please do use my email address, which is available on the screen. And that concludes it for this webinar. Like I said, I'll address any questions now. If you have to leave us, then thank you for joining us. Please feel free to drop me a line in the future with a question, and I'll respond as soon as I'm able. Thank you very much. So yeah, a lot of them is just thank yous. Thank you for joining us. I really do appreciate you joining us. It's a difficult time for everybody, but hopefully by keeping in touch like this, we can keep our relationship going. So Gareth has asked, can you give me an example of objectives to be included within PIMS policy or ISMS policy? So yes. So your existing information security management system should have a set of security objectives which are committed to policies. Clause 6.2 outlines these. You need some privacy information objectives to enhance those. So for example, if you've got a series of objectives which are specific to security, so for example, you want to see an increase in the number of people reporting phishing attempts, for example, is a common one, because the awareness of information security has been raised in your organization, then likewise, you should have an objective which states that you do not want to be subject to a data breach, nobody does, or that if you are processing, that all of the processing activity occurs without incident or the need to report to ICO. You should definitely indicate, once you've established the privacy system, what the objectives of that system are. I hope that helps, Gareth. If not, please do feel free to drop me an email about any specific things you have in mind. Okay, I don't think I've got any more questions there for the time being. I've got a few emails to address. I can see that already. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. We've got another one coming soon about safety and remote working and business continuity planning, which hopefully is pertinent in the current environment. And there'll be a rerun of this presentation with an enhancement for a statement of applicability information for controllers and processes, which is coming. Please do check the website for dates once they are set in stone, and I will speak to you then. Thank you very much.